Namaste to one and all present here. I, Randhir Kumar Gautam, on behalf of Vishwaneedam Center for Asian Blossoming, welcome you in the second Swadhyay Sahchakra dialogue of this year. And the topic of today's discussion is creative and very unique. The topic of today's Swadhyay Sahchakra dialogue is Somaesthetics and Yogaustra, a reading through film. It is a great pleasure and indeed an honor to have available with us a great speaker, Dr. Vinod Balakrishnan ji. I welcome Professor Ananta Giri, moderator of today's session, Minati Pradhan ji, Dr. Jeffrey, Professor Gyan Gului, and all friends co-present here, and also who watch this program from our YouTube channel. Let me give a kind of brief introduction to our speaker, Dr. Vinod Balakrishnan, who is a professor at Department of Humanities and Social Sciences at National Institute of Technology, Trichy. He is a deep thinker, creative writer, and a motivational speaker. He did his PhD from very important universities of India, Mahatma Gandhi University, Kerala. He has been fellow at Cornell University, New York. He has been engaged in many important research in India. He was also part of a research group in association with Indian Institute of Advanced Studies, Simla. What is interesting is his quest for understanding the quest of creative thinking and creative writing. Let me also give a kind of brief introduction of our Swadhyay Sahchakra, a circle of co-learning, of mutual studies and self. It is an initiative of studying and learning together self, culture, and societies and worlds. Friends who are associated with this centers are eager to walk and mediate with new horizons of thinking and new movements of social and cultural change at work in our contemporary world. We study seekers such as Maharishi Aurobindo, Mahatma Gandhi, Chittaranjan Das, who is a creative soul, who was a deep thinker from Odisha, and many others from around the world. We also present our own writings and reflect our creativity together. We invite people from different fields of life to share their journey, their lives, their visions, and their sadhanas and struggles for creating a world of beauty, dignity, and dialogue. We meet every Sunday and we have collaborations with different institutions in India and abroad. And we look forward for your kind engagement and participation. To moderate this session and also to give a brief introduction of topic, may I invite Ananta Bhai to give a brief remark of today's session, and then we'll listen Balakrishnan ji. Yes, Ananta bhai, over to you.
Thank you so much, dear Randhir. Thank you, Professor Vinod Balakrishnan, Minati, and all friends co-present on the second Sunday of our unfolding new year 2023. And it is enriching to be with Professor Balakrishnan this evening and to get insights into, namaskar, to get insights into Namaskaram sare, oru meeting irike, kuncham sound irike, oru meeting, namaskar. So to get insights into Somaesthetics. Somaesthetics is Namaskaram sare, oru professor, oru kuncham sound irike, oru meeting irike, online lecture. Minisham, henge, sound irike, henge. Now, just oru online lecture irike, henge. Just Anchaminisam, sir. Okay. Sir. So just Anchaminisam. Okay. So it is enriching to be enlightened about Soma aesthetics. Soma aesthetics is a field of inquiry as well as engagement nurtured by American philosopher Richard Sussman, who built on pragmatic traditions. And he then explored many deep issues, and the creative aspect of Professor Balakrishnan and his insightful student Swati Elizabeth has been to bring Soma aesthetics in dialogue with Yoga Sutra, and that is enriching. And Professor Balakrishnan had kindly sent me a copy of the book, and I was reading Professor Susterman's forward to the book, where he is writing that the whole engagement with Soma aesthetics is really contribute to a different humanity emerging. And as I read it, I think one important aspects of Soma aesthetics, that how do we engage with body aesthetics in a way that we have a sense of focus, a sense of attention in a world of distraction, and how ethics and aesthetics today can cultivate a way of attentiveness in the midst of distractions of many kind, and how body becomes a locus of ethics and aesthetics. As we think about Soma aesthetics, of course, we would have to think about the border crossing between ethics and aesthetics, in which film and literature plays a very important role. We can also remember here the challenge of bringing narrative ethics and narrative aesthetics together. Film studies as a way of entering this field is also equally creative and challenging. I am remembering a conversation I had many years ago as I am joining us today from this little temple corner in Mylapore in the midst of the streets of life. I remember once I was returning from a meeting with the former agriculture minister in Indonesia, and I was coming back to my hotel on the back of a motorbike rider. And he told me that how film is so important for him as a Muslim to understand the values of Islamic culture and some of the message of Holy Quran. He told me how film helps him to do that. Therefore, in a way, film is a narrative of life. And finally, about Yoga Sutra is that as Patanjali's Yoga Sutra has been a point of dialogue between Soma aesthetics and Yoga Sutra in the work of Professor Balakrishnan and Swati. But we can also invite the perspective of Sri Aurobindo, his integral yoga. And Sri Aurobindo has a root in pragmatism as well. And in fact, my first meeting with Professor Balakrishnan was in a seminar on Sri Aurobindo, and in which both of us met, and we happened to spend our evening together in the same room. So Sri Aurobindo yoga has a dimension of pragmatism as well as spirituality. So how Somaesthetics, Yoga Sutra, and film studies become an occasion for us to engage ourselves with many contemporary challenges with ethics, aesthetics, and narrativity. So it's a joy to welcome Professor Balakrishnan and to have our conversation. As I am with the street today, so from now onward, I request Randhir to kindly nurture our unfolding discussions, including presentation by Professor Balakrishnan. Yes, Vinod, you can kindly make your presentation, please, Vinod.
Yeah, thank you, Ananta. Thank you, Randhir. I greet everyone associated with Vishwaneedam and who gravitate to Ananta Giri as part of the Vishwaneedam movement. I greet everyone on this day and wish you all a great year ahead. I feel honored to be a part of this lecture series. This was supposed to be happening sometime last year, but one thing or the other kept coming in the way, and I'm happy it is happening now. I must thank Ananta for providing the right pitch, the most accurate pitch for Somaesthetics and Yoga Sutra. In fact, he has covered the first part of my talk where I would have to locate Somaesthetics. Now, it is a discipline to be considered within the broad rubric of Western philosophy. But as a philosophical concern, there is an accent to Somaesthetics. The accent is that is the same that one would see in philosophers like, say, a Marx, or a philosopher like even Wittgenstein, a philosopher like Simone de Beauvoir, where philosophy is not merely an exercise in abstractions, an exercise in merely logical thinking, an exercise in philosophizing. The greater concern for these philosophers is that while they are quite invested in the main ideas of the philosophical tradition, their accent is on what philosophy can do. So it is not about what philosophy would say, but what philosophy can actually do and do for man. So there is a humanistic orientation in the way these philosophers go about their business. And one would see the same concern in Richard Schusterman. He is not happy to merely philosophize, though he is trained in the best of Western philosophical traditions, completely schooled in Western philosophy. But there is a pragmatist streak in Schusterman, and he would like to be identified as carrying on the pragmatist tradition of philosophy, where while like other branches of philosophy, other schools of philosophy, the American pragmatist philosophy is also interested in truth, but then not in truth per se, but the truth that would have some value for man. And the concern then is to have a better account of the truth. So when it comes to the application of pragmatism, then the account of truth would also be the way we would want to live our lives, the way we would want to live our lives philosophically. And for a pragmatist, it would be to have a better account of truth, of life. And this is, and what is interesting about the pragmatism of philosophers like William James or John Dewey is that there is an openness. It is not that once we establish our premises, we would want the arguments to be completely tied down by these premises. There is a room for expanding this idea of truth or this account of life. So that is what makes pragmatism more accessible or, not dated, because when we have better ways of understanding our reality in terms of even technologies of perception, not only our perception, but then there are technologies of perception, and we would have a greater access to our lives and the truth. We would also have a far more nuanced perception or consciousness of this life. So that is one respect in which pragmatist philosophy is not mere philosophizing. It emphasizes applying philosophy to everyday life. So in James's time, it would have been about belief, or in the way we would conduct our everyday life as a moral order. But for Schusterman, who continues from where John Dewey leaves off, it is the body. And here, what we would need to see is, he doesn't say this is body aesthetics. There is a kind of body aesthetics all of us experience. In the age of the internet, in digital world in which we exist, there is a certain packaging of the body, the representation of the body, and there is also a certain consumption of the body in terms of fashion, in terms of modeling the body, in terms of even fetishizing the body, and we call that in terms of mass culture, we call it celebrating the body. But that is not the sense in which Schusterman would want to approach the body aesthetic. So what the mass culture, how mass culture looks at the body is what we can call in very simple terms as body aesthetic or a kind of corporeal aesthetics. But the way Schusterman wants us to look at the body, and for which he would consciously rename the body, or he will anoint the body. And for him, anointing the body is by recognizing certain, the potential of the body, which is there, but is still unrealized, like an unexplored territory or a neglected territory. Going by the Western philosophical attitudes, in fact, we should be able to see the separation happening even before Descartes comes on to the scene. There has been the ground has been prepared to see the body as separate from the spirit or matter or mind or the soul, depending on who is the philosopher. Maybe a philosopher like Augustine would, Saint Augustine would want to see the soul there. But then a Descartes would probably want to see the mind there. But the preparation had started even with Plato, because Plato was, I would say, a little suspicious of the vulnerability of the body. And so for him and for many of the Greek philosophers, there was also the need to focus on that which is not so earthy, that which is transcendental, and that which is more perfect. And we would see that the skepticism that starts with Plato continues through the Christian mediation into the idea of the imperfect body or the vulnerable body, the body that can catch a devious practice, and the impure body, and so on. And so by the time we come to Descartes, there is the mind as a faculty that can give to the body a better account of the reality. So maybe that is one reason why Schusterman felt in the 20th century that he should harness philosophy for the purpose of helping us use philosophy in more positively humanistic terms, for which it is not tenable or acceptable to neglect the body. And the body has to be reclaimed. And so in Schusterman's terms, it is not the body, but the soma. Because this is a neglected territory, this has also been an unexplored territory. And while philosophers whom we recognize as having spoken about art, about morality, about ethics, about epistemology, ontology, but these philosophers have also evinced a keen interest in the body. And in that respect, it's not as if suddenly there has been a revival of the body. Even the Greeks had their gymnasiums. It was incumbent on every student who comes to the academy or the lyceum to also be one who takes care of the body, cultivates the body. Socrates is known to have prescribed dance as a way of keeping the mind nimble for philosophizing or for debating. Now, so when we come to Schusterman, body is soma. Body is intelligent. The body is capable of thinking for itself. The body is capable of renewal. And the body is also capable of a request to the host to mute everybody. Thank you. So, so the body is capable of its own agency, and that is how he would want to see the body. So it is soma. But yeah, but the body is not just the medium of experience. The body is also capable of representing that experience. So there is a certain way in which we relate to the environment and the way in which we accept the responses from the environment. And when there are conscious choices that we make through the body, then there is a kind of negotiation happening, an interaction with the environment that is happening. There is a breaking away from habits and old practices to new wirings that are happening through the body. And so this reshaping is no different from the way in which any aesthetic process works of reshaping towards an ideal form, and so on. So where all the parts are brought together, pulled together into a possible harmony, and so it is aesthetic. Now, interestingly, in his second book, Body Consciousness, Schusterman in his body consciousness, Schusterman reads a few philosophers like, say, William James, John Dewey, Simone de Beauvoir, Maurice Merleau-Ponty, and Michel Foucault, and Wittgenstein. So he would, through these philosophers, and I shall just make a small detour through these philosophers to tell us how that interest in the body is evinced by these philosophers, and how Schusterman gathers them for his a school of thought called Somaesthetics. Now, for William James, who chronologically in that is actually the 5th chapter, but he should chronologically come first. And James is a pragmatist American philosopher, as many of us would know. And for him, the body is the storm center, the origin of coordinates. And it is that place of stress in our experience train. So he would look at the body as a kind of, kind of a photographic plate, if we may, where all experience comes to register themselves. And that is, and so one must take an intense interest in the body, because unless the body is prepared for the experience of the world, we are not going to register or have an account of the truth. seeing it from a pragmatist perspective. Maybe in the New England culture in which he existed, for him, that care of the body meant the ideals of hardihood, the virtue of physical health and vigor, and the tradition of physical fitness. So this even sounds like a Victorian ideal of body care. And the next philosopher that Schusterman would consider is John Dewey. And Schusterman reads very carefully John Dewey. In fact, he elaborately reads Arthur's Experience of John Dewey. And to John Dewey, the human body is the most wonderful of all structures of the vast universe. So when John Dewey looks at the body, for him it is a structural entity, no different from an aesthetic entity where there are beautiful parts and these parts must cohere in order to be a beauty in its totality. And he reminds us that biological factors are at the root of the aesthetic of the body. So those are the elements of somaesthetics which make it compatible for a reading with the Yoga Sutra, because the Yoga Sutra also is not unmindful of the biological aspects before we can take it forward into refinement and practice and towards spirituality. And for John Dewey, it is the biological which leads to the spiritual through disciplining of the body. There are the French philosophers that Schusterman reads, and he is a great fan of the phenomenological thinker Maurice Merleau-Ponty, because Merleau-Ponty has also spoken extensively on the human body. In fact, by many accounts, he is known as the patron saint of the body. And Ananta Giri, in his introduction to this field, spoke about Sri Aurobindo. And Sri Aurobindo, in his Renaissance in India, talks about three beautiful qualities of India, like her spirituality, her originality, and so on, her vitality. But there is one beautiful statement that Sri Aurobindo makes. He says he invokes the Vedic idea of Shariram Kalu Dharma Sadhana. The body is as much a medium for the realization of Dharma. So that is exactly the idea we would see in Maurice Merleau-Ponty, where the body is the crucial source of all perception and action. So it is not just perception, at which level it will be merely Husserlian, but then where he extends Husserl would be to take it to the point of action. And it is at that point that Merleau-Ponty would actually come closer to a William James or a John Dewey, where we would see that philosophy is not mere armchair abstraction, but then it is also a way of applying ideas, perceptions to life, living with a certain consciousness that we have earned, gathered, worked hard for, and through the body. And that action would also involve expression. So it is consciousness with which we enrich the body, but then it is also the way we would express our consciousness through the body. So there is not merely perception, there is also an expression. So it is, and because this perception moves towards expression through a certain construction or conception, as we can say, it would then be very aesthetic, because there is a conscious shaping that is happening there. So the body then becomes the ground for all language and meaning. So when we say meaning, we would probably look at that which is which makes us feel better, which makes us feel exhilarated, ennobled by our own action, which is an understanding that we have moved qualitatively from a certain point A to a point B in our own life, and we are able to see it, understand it. Now, that is a very interesting point, which is phenomenological, because it relates to the way we understand ourselves in relation to the world. But then it is also language. Here, language should be read as how the analytic philosophers read. Language is here the body. So there is a certain way in which the body is organized, or the body organizes itself, that it becomes the language which more effectively communicates with the world. And now, when you come to a fellow philosopher of Maurice Merleau-Ponty, like Simone de Beauvoir, we would see that she applies this pragmatist orientation to the social frame, particularly in the case of women's bodies and the bodies of the aged. So, and she would say that when we perceive the hierarchy of society, we would see that women are given a lower rung in the hierarchy, the aged a further lower rung. Now, in the context of Beauvoir, it starts as a philosophy, but then it very quickly then moves towards a cultural reading of these ideas. And so she is more into decoding the cultural expressions which one would get to see in society. So she would see how women's bodies are represented. Women's bodies are spoken about in language. Women's bodies are celebrated by the masses. The same for the aged. And she also, as a very sensitive, conscientious philosopher, observes something more interesting. And that is where she applies the philosophy of the body. She says, when women and the aged start accepting the hierarchy, when they unconsciously or consciously accept this hierarchy, then they have to, then they consciously or unconsciously shape their bodies to serve the interests of those that are higher in the hierarchy, which is a patriarchal order. So she would see that the body becomes a party to this devious project of subordinating women and the aged. And so her the activist in Beauvoir, the philosopher, would propose the solution that the body, the very same body, which is now enslaved, is the very instrument for liberation. So one would need that very same body. The woman would need her own body. So there are two very important texts of Boer, The Second Sex and The Coming of Age. And she would say that the women and the aged will have to now take control of their bodies, see it as an instrument which alone can provide them a better grasp of their world and provide them a better understanding of their reality. And so that is the soul, the body is the source of freedom for women and the aged. And so she recommends somatic cultivation. We would see in another French philosopher, Foucault, who towards the end of his career, he writes some very important books, 3 volumes. Now it's the 4th volume on the history of sexuality, which is about the care of the body. And it is about sexuality and the care of the body. Schusterman also reads Wittgenstein, and for the later Wittgenstein, philosophy has a larger role, which is to negotiate the problems of life. So for which one has to become self-critical in order to improve one's own self. So this is what we would, Ananta Giri in one of his very important discussions, there is a collection of essays Giri has published called Swadhyaya. He has been an advocate. In fact, the first meeting that I have had with Ananta Giri was in a conference where I think he was also speaking about Swadhyaya. So Wittgenstein also speaks about Swadhyaya. We would need to perform an analysis of a self-analysis in order to have a better understanding of our own self. And so it is Swadhyaya. In Wittgenstein, this intense application of self-analysis for self-improvement will give us a better means to use our minds, a better approach to aesthetics, to ethics. So that is how Schusterman would read these philosophers. What we would also see in Somaesthetics is that, like James, like Dewey, like the practical Somaesthetics of Simone de Beauvoir, the care of the body must always tend towards meliorative positions. We should be able to improve ourselves. So melioration is that ideal. Now, how melioration is to do better, be able to see better, be able to live better. Now, how do we do that? We would be able to do that only when we understand ourselves the more. And this is where we would see Somaesthetics converging with Patanjali's Yoga Sutra, because the Yoga Sutra is all about Anushasanam. It is about this. It is a discipline It is about discipline, and it is about the methods of discipline. Of course, it says it is yoganushasana. It says Atha yoganushasana. So which means it is not the first document on this discipline. It comes in the middle of perhaps a long tradition where people have been engaged with the body, trying to understand its somaesthetic potential. It's a somaesthetic potential. And there are, and what we also see in Yoga Sutra is it is centered on the self. It is, while we would need instruction of a certain kind to grow in Yoga Sutra, one is on one's own. One is has to depend on one's own means. Unless we are deeply introspective, unless we perform the exercise, unless we keep an account. Sri Aurobindo has his record of yoga. He has 2 volumes in the 35-volume complete works of Sri Aurobindo. There are 2 massive volumes on this record of yoga, where he registers his own growth, the experiments that he conducts, the experiences that he undergoes, and so on. So that exactly is the point where Somaesthetics comes close to Yoga Sutra. Now, taking that as the point of convergence, my scholar and I, but my scholar more than me, applied, Swati did a fabulous job applying Yoga Sutra to and Somaesthetics to the films. We picked 4 films. One is the Karate Kid. The second one is Meera Nair's Kama Sutra. The third one is the Peaceful Warrior. And the fourth one is the 36 Chambers of Shaolin. Now, at one level, it is like providing an illustration. The films have an illustrative role because our focus is on maintaining the convergence or in trying to see how Somaesthetics is better understood through Yoga Sutra. Yoga Sutra becomes more accessible through Somaesthetics. So this conversation, enjoying the conversation is the focus. And so the films have an illustrative purpose. But in trying to watch these films through the lens of Somaesthetics and Yoga Sutra, we are able to see that these are not merely films, martial arts films. These are films which have a more educative value. I will take one instance from each of these 4 films, and then I will close my talk and I will wait for any response from the group. Let us say the Karate Kid. There is a very reluctant young man who comes to the guru, and the guru is a kung fu guru, Jackie Chan, in this film, who is training this young American rat. But and so he makes the boy clean the car or clean the windows. So for which he has to use both his hands, rotate them in a certain way. And there is also the breathing routine that goes with it. Now, you would actually find it very painful when you don't do it in a very aesthetic manner. By aesthetic, I mean where all the parts come together, understanding their precise roles. For instance, when there is an inward movement, there should be a a breathing out, and when there is an outward movement, you breathe in. And so this movement, and there is a certain rhythm we build. So there is a body that now, there is a physical body where the organs are moving, but they are moving in rhythm with the process of breathing. So, and then we also see that it is not just something called a body as an independent entity. We would see that the mind also is now coming into the game. And so the play would now bring more and more disparate entities into harmony. So, and this is called abhyas. Now, Schusterman would call it mindful repetition. And in Yoga Sutra, we call it abhyasa. Now, abhyas is not just repetition. Abhyas is mindful repetition, because it is not a mechanical process. It is a process where we want to get better at what we are doing. So repetition, so routine 1, while it might apparently be the same as routine 2, 3, and yen, when we apply more and more of our mind into it, when we immerse ourselves into it, then we see that 2, 3, 4 are not exactly like 1. There are very small incremental improvements happening. There is an ameliorative process. So over a period of time, abhyas would make us realize that it is just not a painful job of cleaning, but it is something else where the body is involved in a certain geometry and symmetry and the rhythm. There is music, and so it suddenly becomes very, as maybe, in aesthetics, they say, the flow of the rasa happens. The tala leads to rasa, right? So that is Karate Kid. Then in Kama Sutra, of course, there is an interesting story. There is a courtesan and so on. But let me not go too much into the details. It is about, let us take only the role of Rasa Devi, Rekha, who plays the role of the teacher. She's that realized soul who has mastered all the arts of the Kama Sutra. So now she is imparting her knowledge to the girls. Now what we see is that the little girls, when they first touch their own bodies, they start in surprise. It seems like they are touching a stranger's body. But then slowly the education starts, and they start understanding their own bodies better. In the case of the courtesan, she is, her tradition insists that she has a greater knowledge of not only her body, but how her body now communicates with the other bodies, like say the king's body, and how she would be at will work her charms on the king's body and overpower him. So there is, so aesthetics is about the cultivation of the body, but then the body itself as a work of art. And it is not done from the outside, we do it from the inside. So from somebody who does not see this inner beauty, the potential lamp which is not lighted, to the point when there is oil poured, there is the wick laid, it is lighted, and then that light glows in the way we perform our gestures, and the dancer moves, and the way the dancer fills that space, and the dancer takes control of the space. And in the communication society, the audience come into that space, and they become a part of this music, and it is one aesthetic compact, so. And then the Peaceful Warrior, where it is Dan Millman, who is a gymnast of Olympic stature, but then his mind is outward looking till he meets Socrates, who turns his mind inward, which in Yoga Sutra would be dharana, where you withdraw your powers and energies to one point from where you would be able to control yourself, because the next stage would be dhyana, focus. So for the individual to arrive at focus, and beyond the focus is where you direct your action. So for which he meets a guru, a mentor, and that guru is Socrates in The Peaceful Warrior. Very beautiful book, an equally interesting film. A fantastic graphic novel is also available. So that's one text where you have 3 versions of the same narrative available. But what we also see is that we are not individual. It's like it moves towards a Bhagavad Gita kind of a situation where we come into the world bearing some beautiful legacy, and then we have to gather our graces in this world, and when we leave, we leave ourselves in service to others and then leave. So it moves from the very individual, crass individuality through a spiritual reorientation to service unto others. So there is a lot of restructuring, disciplining, aesthetic modification, and finally an ethical proposal is also made by the author. And the last film that we read is The 36 Chambers of Shaolin, where the body of the individual becomes an instrument of social change, because one person who goes to the 36 chambers understands how his body first is inadequate for the demands. He then shapes his body to become adequate for the demands of the chambers, and then he creates his own chamber, and finally in the fullness of knowledge, he goes to empower society and overthrow the tyrant, which is a metaphor for how we can sometimes win over the obstacles that are there, which is a kind of a constant in any aesthetic frame. So I will stop here, and because we've touched 10 p.m., I'll stop here, and then we'll wait for any comment or response.
Yeah, thank you, sir. Thank you so much for your very insightful deliberation. It was like listening to poetry, step by step. Explained all these things. So I ask the participants to please unmute themselves and ask any questions, or else you can type in the chat box. I invite Professor Ganluigi to share his opinions and views. Professor Ganluigi, please.
Excuse me. Yes, thank you very much. I cannot. I had some problem with the camera. I don't. Yes. Now, yes, it's a bit dark here. Excuse me. Thank you very much. It was really very interesting, and I was reflecting on the different contents. There are very much to be reflected on, and I must admit I do not know at least some of the films which were quoted. Therefore, I should need to see them in order to have an impression. But well, anyway, there was very many contents already on the philosophers. I perhaps now would like to concentrate on Plato, because I am working myself on some analogies between Plato and Yoga Sutras on the one hand, and on the other hand, on between Plato and, for instance, Katha Upanishad. I found very many interesting points of analogies, and I see that now finally a part of the Western, so to speak, of the Western commentaries have oriented itself to these analogies, because these analogies can explain very much of the way in which Plato thinks about soul, about body, and about the destiny of the man. And in particular, I found some, so to speak, some analogies as regards specifically Plato, some points of Plato, for instance, in Phaedrus, in the great myth of the chariots in Phaedrus, or in Phaedo, or also in the Republic, in some books of the Republic, some analogies between the way in which Plato, so to speak, predicates a way of detaching, at least minimally, from the influences of the senses in order to have a concentration on the mind, on the pure mind, and of being, so to speak, free from the influences of the body, which can contrast and can be an hindrance to the activity of the mind. For instance, between Plato in the Republic, for instance, or in Phaedo, Plato exhortations to detaching from the influences of the body, and on the other hand, for instance, what is in Yoga Sutra, the procedure, the passage of dharana, or also dhyana, the meditation, and samadhi, absorption, also here. I think that, for instance, as regards samadhi, we have in Plato some points in which it seems that the subject, the individual subject, is, so to speak, absorbed in the ideas. And so there is something like, in Plato at least, coming back to the pure mind, he would say, to the pure soul, which is not influenced by at least the bad influences of the body. So I think there are very many interesting analogies between Plato and Yoga Sutra, and I think that I hope at least that the Western culture acknowledge that we can learn very, very much if we have the patience to study appropriately the text of the Indian cultural heritage in general, and in particular, for instance, Yoga Sutra, because we can learn very, very many instruments in order to understand the specific point of Plato. And so I would like to finish here, because there are also other persons who would like to speak, but of course it was really very, very interesting, and I will hear again the whole conference, because I need to meditate on very, very many points. So it was really very brilliant, and I thank you very much, very, very much for your brilliant exposition. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Sir, I would request you to take notes of a few more questions, and at a time you can answer.
Yeah.
If it is possible.
Yeah.
Anybody else who would like to ask any question? Dr. Abhishek, please. Okay. If he's taking some time, then Dr. Resu.
Yeah, Vinod, can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Okay, wonderful presentation, Vinod. And I was very curious. Of course, I have given some comments in the chat box. So if you could respond to that. But I was also very interested in the process of selection of those 4 films. So one is a man's body, other is a woman's body, but and obviously Kama Sutra would play a role and martial art films would play a role. But then what were the processes that you employed, the discussions you had when you identified these 4 films? I will be very curious to know.
Oh, yeah. Yes. Abhishek,
Yes, I can hear. Please go ahead.
Abhishek, this is Abhishek from our Institute of Advanced Studies days, BIM.
Yes, same. Trichy, Ahmedabad, and now Calcutta.
Okay. Abhishek, it is a little far more, as you rightly said, it is a little more nuanced in the way when you have to, read films which are sometimes based on text. You will have to do justice to the film. You will also have to manage the theoretical elements in both the fields, both Yoga Sutra and let us say and Somaesthetics. So what we when we take the case of let us say the peaceful warrior, just an example, the peaceful warrior. Now we would take situations. Now, what is my focus? My focus is to see if I am able to do justice to Somaesthetics, which is, can I establish that this is philosophy which can have practical application, or philosophy which can help us live a better life, or philosophy which can make us better human beings. So that is the way I would be able to do justice to Somaesthetics. How would I be able to do justice to Yoga Sutra? To be to read, to at least capture the spirit of the important concepts and terms there in terms of practice. So and then you come to, so you will choose situations in, let us say, a film like Peaceful Warrior, where the person's mind, while he is very talented, and he has even gone to the point of winning, being qualifying for the Olympics. This man is thinking about, glory, about himself as an extraordinarily talented person. And then what happens is that he doesn't realize that he is spiritually not ready. Now, that is a point where you would need a guru factor, a mentor who would be able to show you the right direction. So this is very Upanishadic. He then gets to meet Socrates, this person, an old man, and he thinks that this person does not have, is not as accomplished as he is. But Socrates has reached a stage where he is in a position to teach. And the way he teaches him is once again through experience. So there is a bowl of fruits arranged for him, but it is so beautifully aesthetically arranged. Now, while Socrates' way of eating is a way of also respecting the arrangement, the beauty of it, enjoying the fruit, which is which will take us to, coming into touch with the prana of the food. All right. And so it is a larger participation. And on the other side, we would see that for Dan Millman, it is only, he just falls to the food and then polishes off the bowl in no time because he is hungry. Now, the difference is the distance. The difference is also the distance he has to travel from consumption to graceful participation in the ways of this world. So for which we would bring in the spirit of dharana. Dharana is at that stage where you will need to gather your energies when they are outside. When you think about things which are outside you, then while you may be talented and you will be performing at some level of efficiency, you are not aesthetically complete. So what we would see here then is Socrates setting a benchmark for him and towards which he should graduate, and he will graduate through those Ashtanga stages. So that is one very quick way in which I have demonstrated, but given the time and our connectivity, we would be able to do it more elaborately.
Yeah, one more question is there in the chat box. That Khushbu is asking, would you love to know more Somaesthetics researching in area of wellness and yoga she is doing? So would you like to?
Would love to know more about Somaesthetics researching in the area of wellness and yoga. Yes. It is, it is a very ramified field. You can apply it to design. Let us say there are industries which are now designing products for man, but then what kind of design? Unless you understand the body, unless you understand the needs of the body and you are sensitive to it, what kind of design will come out? For instance, let us say even the seat of a car. Now, how will you design it if you don't fully see the man there? It is not mere ergonomics. It is the aesthetics of design, which is more than mere functional comfort. So it has to be functionally satisfactory, but it has also to be aesthetically complete. So it is very ramified field into paint. You can bring it into painting. You can bring it into alternative medicine, where there is the role of the body. In fact, one of my students wrote a paper on minding illness, how the way you would be able to even think about your illness and get the body to go through certain routines, which a priest has done, and he has to some extent, managed to moderate the impact of cancer. So we just called it minding illness, and as an alternative to chemotherapy and things like that, so there is a lot that we can do. Even yoga, yoga is not something we will be able to understand by just going to a school. Yoga is something, even the fact that we can sit in Sukhasana or Siddhasana or Padmasana, one day's outcome is not the same as the next day's outcome. And then we are able to see the minute changes in the dynamics in the environment which are influencing the outcomes. So we become more aware of ourselves and the environment in which we are located. So much can be done in dance, in the preparation for dance, in the discipline. Everything is a subject well worth researching in Somaesthetics. Before the machines take over, or even as the machines are taking over, we should be able to see how much of this Somaesthetic space we can still reclaim for ourselves and for others.
Okay. Randhir, if you have any questions, you can ask.
Thank you so much. Unfortunately, my network is not working, but I just listened the last part. It was very inspiring. I just want to ask or know about how new liberal model of development is trying to commodify the whole yoga and aesthetics uh, in a way like if you go to the any cult for that matter, they will just make you realize that you do means they are doing many things and everything except adhyatma. So
Exactly.
how we can have a kind of realization of self in that sense. I have also experienced the same kind of thing, because of my curiosity. I went to so many religious cult. At the end of the day, I realized that until unless you read or meditate, you cannot find that self-actualization in other sense. So the whole understanding of preaching.
Yeah. I thought
uh,
beautiful. You have answered that question. The last part is experience. And what you were speaking is experience. I thought that itself is the finest answer to the perplexity with which you started that question. So that's wonderful. We can only learn from our experience. Yeah.
I have a basic question. Can I ask now?
Please, please.
Yeah. You were telling, that impure body. What do you really mean by that?
Madam.
Impure body. Impure body.
Oh, yeah.
And one more thing, you were telling mass culture look body as aesthetics. Can you put some light on that?
Yeah. I realize that those two terms would require clarification at some point. One is culturally, where culture has been influenced seriously by religion. We would see that religion would want the constituency of devotees to follow. And for the purpose of following, it is necessary that the body is not distracted by pleasures. So that is one concern. And so the way cultural texts or even religious texts look at the body is as that which is vulnerable. So when somebody says you will not covet, it is actually an indictment of the body's vulnerability, that you will not be satisfied with what you have and you would want to rob somebody else or take it away from somebody else by force. So in this manner, and in even more strong ways, the body has been, for instance, there are body fluids which come out, and there are religions which, from a religious perspective, the body fluids are sometimes seen to be impure. And then, there are a lot of cultural ways in which the body is inscribed as inferior to the soul as being that which cannot be affected. So the perishable body and the imperishable soul is a kind of separation they make. And that is, I was only referring to that. And anthropology would give us any number of examples for that. Then, with respect to mass culture, you see, mass culture operates ideologically. There is an idea of standards which mass culture creates, and it sells this in the form of desire for the body. And so when it comes to health drinks, food, clothes, there is a certain standard which is celebrated. or which is promoted. And through this, mass culture creates in us an idea of the beautiful body. So in order to attain this beautiful body, there are cases of girls who starve in order to get into a size 0, because mass culture says that is the aesthetic body. So in order to attain to that aesthetic standard, we would punish our own body. So these are the ways in which we are ideologically controlled by the mass media, the mass culture. And that was my point, where we are not critical of what our body needs. We don't talk to our body. We only see outside, listen to others.
Okay, thank you, sir. Anybody else, or we are closing time? So I would like to offer a vote of thanks. I, Minati Pradhan, on behalf of Swadhyaya Sahachakra and Vishwaneedam Center for Asian Blossoming, would like to thank our today's chief speaker, Professor Vinod Balakrishnan, for his very insightful deliberation. And thank you, sir, taking us, enlightening us step by step of every question and every aspect of it. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Like to thank our moderator and our mentor, Professor Anant Giri, every week taking us to a different journey, I must say. Thank you, Ananta Bhai. And I would like to thank Professor Ganluiji, like every webinar, for his insightful deliberation, his opinions, his participation. It encourages us all the time. Thank you, Ganluiji.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you very much. Thank all the participants, Dr. Abhishekji, Dr. Reshu, Khushbu, all the online participants, and our Facebook and Zoom both platform users. Please pardon me if I'm forgetting anybody's name. At the last, not the least, I would like to thank our convener, Professor Randhir Kumar Gautam, every week arranging such webinars and executing it even though he's traveling, executing everything so fruitfully. Thank you, Randhir, for everything. And thank you all, and good night.
Good night.
Thank you so much, Minty.
May I leave now?
Very insightful session. Very insightful.
Thank you.
Yes.